Why, hello everyone. If you are coming back to watch one of my videos again, welcome. And if you are new, I hope you enjoy yourself. Please feel free to subscribe if you like the video. Today we are going to be talking about planets and which planets are easy to observe in the night sky if you are a beginner in astronomy. You just got your telescope, you got your pair of binoculars, and you're ready to go out into the night sky and observe from astrological objects. But what do you look at? How do you look at them? Well, this video will go into a little detail as to what to look for in the night sky as it relates to the planets, and the level of difficulty beginning by the easiest planet to observe all the way down to the most difficult planets to observe. I'm not going to go into the planets that are almost impossible to observe from Earth with the level of telescopes that many beginners have and even more experienced astronomers have, unless you're doing research with research level telescopes. And those planets are simply Uranus and Neptune. Those are extremely difficult to see with a telescope because for the most part they will look like stars from Earth, and then when observed with a telescope they will look like stars. But the rest of the planets can be seen from Earth and can be seen well with a telescope or a strong pair of binoculars. So let's begin. The first planet from Earth that you can see, and this planet in relation to the rest of the planets can be seen from cities, can be seen from fields in the middle of nowhere. They're not really dependent on light pollution, and therefore you can enjoy observing planets from anywhere. When they will appear in the night sky is dependent on many things. So it's dependent on their orbit, it's dependent on the Earth's orbit. And if those things are favorable, then you'll be able to see the planet. And you can find that information online. This video is just going to talk about what planets are easily seen, how they appear in the night sky, and what you can see. The first planet that you can see, that is the easiest planet to see, is this planet. Let's go here, select. We're gonna take a nice little trip to the planet Venus. Venus is known as the morning and evening star, depending on when it is in the night sky. If it appears in the evening, it's called the evening star. If it appears in the morning, it's called the morning star. And the reason it is called those things is because outside of the sun and outside of the moon, it is the brightest object in the sky. It is extremely bright. When you see Venus, you cannot miss Venus. And one of the ways you can tell if you're looking at Venus or any planet and know that it's not a star is that if you see a planet, note its location. Come back in, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes. And that position, that planet will have moved. That star / planet will have moved in the night sky. You will not miss it. But in terms of this video, Venus is the easiest planet to see. Now, I should let you know that the reason it is the easiest planet to see is also its detriment. So if you're looking for a planet that has interesting features, like let's say its atmosphere like Jupiter, or surface features like Mars, or rings like Saturn, Venus unfortunately doesn't have that. It basically will look like how it is appearing on the screen. A whitish, yellowish sphere. And that's because of its atmosphere. Its atmosphere reflects a large amount of light. And given its proximity in relation to Earth, all those things contribute to it being extremely bright. But one of the interesting things that those other planets do not have is that Venus goes through phases like the Moon, and that's simply because of its position as it relates to Earth. It's between Earth and the Sun, and that in non-scientific terms basically controls how it appears when observing from Earth. So Venus does actually go through phases. There's basically the full version of Venus that you can see. There are half versions of Venus that have, like, imagine it like the Moon. So you have the full moon, half moon, quarter moon, new moon. Venus operates when observed from Earth the same way. You basically have a full Venus, half Venus, quarter Venus, new Venus. Those aren't the technical terms, but that's basically how they appear from Earth. So Venus does go through the phases when observed from Earth. So that is an interesting thing that you can see when observing Venus. But it is the brightest planet in the sky. You will know it when you see it. But I do suggest you look up when Venus will appear in the sky, and then when you go out, you will not miss it. It is the brightest object outside of the Moon and Sun in the night sky. The next planet that is the next easiest to see is this one. Oh, I mean, before we go, you can see Venus in good detail with a telescope and with a strong pair of binoculars. You can see Venus both ways. The next planet that can be seen relatively easily is Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is also easily seen. It is not as bright as Venus, but it is pretty bright. The interesting features about Jupiter, though, is that not only will you be able to observe its atmosphere, but Jupiter, when observed from Earth, has four moons that can be seen. That can be seen from Earth if you're observing with a telescope or a strong pair of binoculars. And I say that because Jupiter basically has it's a miniature solar system, and when you observe Jupiter, you will be able to see these moons, which are known as the Galilean moons. And those are basically the moons that have been observed since ancient times that you can see with telescopes from Earth. And they are extremely bright, and therefore when you observe Jupiter, you will also be able to see some, though not all, of the Galilean moons, depending on when they are in orbit. And just so you know what the Galilean moons are, they are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. So let's see if we can go through each one. So let's go Io. Let's go to Io first. So this is Io. I actually have a video talking about the Galilean moons, and I also have a video of what they will look like. I took raw video of the Galilean moons when I was able to observe Jupiter. But this is one of them that you can actually see from Earth. Now, you will not be able to see it in this type of detail. They will look like stars when observed with Jupiter. the next Galilean moon that we will see is, let's go here. And this is another one. And the interesting thing about the Galilean moons is that each one of them has their own distinct feature that separates them from everything from the others. And a lot of them aren't like the moon, although the moon is fascinating in and of itself. Then the next one. Europa. Now, an interesting fact about the Galilean moon, and they are named after Jupiter's or his Roman equivalent, Zeus's lovers in Greek mythology. And then the last one is and those are the Galilean moons. So in addition to Jupiter, if you look at Jupiter through a telescope, not only will you be able to see its atmospheric features, but if the moons are in the correct spot, in a good location in their orbit, you will possibly be able to see at least one. Sometimes you can see all of them, but they will appear as stars. The interesting thing about Jupiter is that it is also pretty bright. It is not as bright as Venus, but it is pretty bright. And so if you know where to look for Jupiter, and you can find that information online, many types of astronomy apps actually will point you to these locations in the night sky. You can see Jupiter with your naked eye. It is easily found in the night sky. The next planet that is, how should I say, relatively easy to find. It's a tie, for me anyway, between the next two planets. These are basically interchangeable. But I will say the next planet that is easy for me to find in the night sky, now that I know where to look, is this one. Now you might be wondering, why am I not picking a planet, say, like Saturn? Because Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system. Well, Saturn, while it is the second largest planet, is really, really far. And when you look at it, and you can look at it from Earth, it does appear as a star. In fact, all the planets appear as stars from Earth. But it's really faint, and that can make it difficult to point out. Mars, on the other hand, while it is smaller, it is closer to Earth, but Mars has the distinction of being red, and therefore to me it's easier to locate Mars because Mars has that reddish, it looks like a red star, and there are not a lot of stars, at least with your eye, at least to me, with your eye, that look like that from Earth. Now there are red stars, but Mars is, because it's closer, to me, is much more easily identifiable from Earth because of its the reddish atmosphere and surface that it has, as opposed to Saturn, which looks like a pretty faint star. Now, the thing about Mars, though, the downside to Mars is that it is small. It is smaller than Venus. It is smaller. It's much smaller than Jupiter and Saturn. And therefore, if you want to see surface features, you need a pretty decent sized telescope to see it, or really strong binoculars to see it, in order to really see its surface features. But it is easily found because it gives off a reddish light. Well, it reflects the sun, which then in turn gives it a reddish appearance from Earth. Now, the next planet, and you can probably guess this, is Saturn. Now, I found that everyone enjoys looking at Saturn. I say that because Saturn has the rings, and the rings can be seen anywhere from Earth. The downside to Saturn, as I mentioned previously, is that one, it appears as a faint star from Earth, and two, depending on its orbit and the Earth's orbit, Saturn does go through a period in which its rings are parallel to Earth. And therefore, basically, Saturn looks like this. It looks like that from Earth. Now, that might seem frustrating because Saturn basically doesn't have a lot of surface features, but that it does go through that. And therefore, if you are looking at Saturn, there is a chance, if it's in this cycle, that it will look like that from Earth. But astronomers have basically mapped out how Saturn appears from Earth for many years into the future. So you can find out when will Saturn actually go through this phase in which its rings are parallel to Earth. But the good thing about Saturn is the rings. And when you are able to observe the rings like this from Earth, they are a beautiful sight to behold. And yes, depending on your telescope, but a lot of telescopes will provide this detail. You can see the rings with a good level of detail in that you can see basically different steps of the rings, the gaps of the rings, and you can't actually see the gaps in the rings. And depending on your telescope and how much light you can gather, you can even see these gaps also. But this planet is really a sight to behold. This is one of the more popular planets to look at because of the rings, but just know that it is not as bright as Venus and it's not as bright as Jupiter. And therefore, it does give the appearance of a faint star. But once you are able to see it, you can see it with binoculars or strong pair of binoculars and telescopes. The last planet that we can see from Earth, well, see in some level of detail, is tiny Mercury. The interesting thing about Mercury and what makes it a relatively difficult planet to observe is that because of its orbit, well, because of its distance from the sun, from Earth, Mercury always appears close to the sun. And therefore, obviously, you can't observe the planet because the sun is too bright. The light from the sun washes out the reflection or the reflecting of the light that Mercury gives off. But there are ways to see this planet. And the ways to see this planet is at twilight. Either just after sunset or just before sunrise, before the sun appears in the Earth's sky. And at those moments, you can observe Mercury. Now, unfortunately with Mercury, it appears as a star. And because of its size, even with binoculars or telescopes, it will appear as a yellowish orb. And you won't be able to see many of, like, because Mercury is cratered like the moon, you will not see that type of detail from Earth. But a feature of Mercury that also shares with Venus is that the inner planets, when observed from Earth, also go through phases. And therefore, just like with the moon, there is a full Mercury, a half Mercury, quarter Mercury, and basically look like a crescent Mercury, and a full Mercury. Now I know, as I mentioned with Venus, those aren't the correct terms, but that's just to show it does go through phases depending on its orbit. So it does go through a period in which from Earth you can see the full sphere of Mercury, and depending on it as it goes through its orbit around the sun, it'll go through half, then crescent, and then once it gets behind the sun as it appears from Earth, then you will not be able to see Mercury. But those are the planets that you can observe from Earth. I have described them in the most easily found planets to the harder planets to observe. But they all have their pluses and minuses in terms of what you can observe with them. And I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, and please leave any questions or comments in the comment section. Like what type of binoculars will work for these planets, what type of telescopes that you might either have or interested in purchasing that will allow you to look at these planets. And thank you very much, and I will see you again.